when once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with eyes turned skyward. For there you have been, and there you will always long to return. Those words were shared by me by today's guest, who I'm going to introduce very, very shortly, but they were the words of Leonardo da Vinci. Striking words, yes, because really, as the old saying goes, once you have after in your blood, yeah, it never leaves. Today, I have the privilege of chatting with one of 1980 pupil pilot, Walter Weiss. He shared that quote with me because he's busy putting his thoughts down on paper in book form. We'll get to talk about that later, but for now, I'm going to say, welcome, yes, sir. It is a great privilege to be chatting with you. And you tell us about your past, about what drove you to the SAAF, and after that, because you had a pretty illustrious career that basically ended when you went and fetched medical supplies in a country in the Far East. But you can tell us all about that. But for now, we welcome Walter Weiss here. And for you guys out there viewing this, you'll immediately get to see that Walter is, he has oxygen as an aid. So bear with us if there are interruptions and moments where we have to take short breaks. Thank you very much. Welkom, meneer. Baie dankie. Welcome here. We say thank you very much that you came to speak with us.
Thank you, Vossie. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I must say, I just see myself as one of the group of very, very fortunate guys that were part of the South African Air Force, where foundations were laid that very, very few people in this world can actually even comprehend the, how can I put it, the friendship that we had, and how we were just part of a big engine, and we were actually just a little cog in the whole damn thing. I don't actually know even where to start, but like in my book that I've tried to write, I was born in Klerksdorp or Klerksdorp. I don't even know what it's called today. I was just a normal little boy running around, and in those days, it was before television even. We were more in the veld outside than anything else. And there was a little airport, or little airfield, I should say, in Klerksdorp. And there were some civilian aircraft, and obviously there were Boeings overflying the town that pulled contrails in the winter. And you know, ever since I was a very small boy, my eyes always went skywards. My grandfather on my dad's side was a engineer in the SAAF, and he was apparently, according to my grandmother, he was part of the First and Second World War. So he was quite an old man when the Second World War broke out, but he was in Roberts Heights, or in Voortrekker Hoogte, I believe nowadays, Tower 20, is it what it's called? In any case, so as a small boy even, all I wanted to do was fly. And school was just something that was really in the way of enjoying life. So I tried to get through it as easy and as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the teachers saw right through me. And, you know, we had school ties that had these stripes on it. And whenever you get a caning, you took a little line out, right? Remember that? Well, my parents had to change my tie halfway through the year every year. That's how naughty we were. In any case, that was school. And at the end of my school career, my mum went to the local, what do you call it, member for parliament. And he gave me a letter to state that he knew my dad and my mum and whatever, and that I would be a good person in the Air Force eventually. So with this letter, I actually applied to the Air Force, and maybe that helped me. And then I was selected to become part of the services school group that was in Voortrekker Hoogte. So in 1980, I went by train from Klerksdorp to Voortrekker Hoogte, and we were dumped there on the siding, right there in Voortrekker Hoogte, and I was totally lost because it was early in the morning, and I didn't even know where north was. And they marched us off, and then the whole thing started, you know, typical basics, hurry up and wait. And about 2 months later, there was a signal, and I was told to report to the office. I went there, and they said, you better get dressed in browns, because at that stage we were all dressed in overalls. And they said, you better get dressed in your browns because you're going to STT. They gave me a driver. He took me to STT, and I arrived there, and there was a Corporal Visa. And he looked at me and said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm here for selection, and I must be back at my base this afternoon. Well, he took a dim view to that, and he immediately sent me back packing. He said, go and fetch all your stuff. So I went back. I had to pack all my stuff. On leaving the army, my lieutenant had me salute him about 20 times, 30 times, because my little finger wasn't touching my ring finger. You know, typical SADF. I ended up at STT, and I met my fellow, how can I put it, culprits even, that was there for selection. Guys like Stuart Lowe, Duncan Gillespie, all the guys that made it at the end of the day. And we were quite a lot of guys. And from day one, we started off with writing 3 exams. We were in a classroom that was filled with young guys, young hopefuls. And we wrote 3 exams. One was on maths and science, one was on geography, and one was on aircraft and the SAAF. And luckily, I met Duncan Gillespie the previous day, and he parted with a lot of knowledge that day. And luckily, I remembered it. And at the end of the exams, this lieutenant walked in, and he started calling out names. And he said, if your name is called, go and stand in the back of the class. At the end of the morning, there were about 3 of us left sitting. And he said to us, you guys that are standing, you can come, you can try again, and you 3, you successful. So only 3 of us made it. Then the medical started, which lasted about 2 weeks. A couple of guys also lost it there. And eventually, about a month later, I was back at the services school, and everybody was busy with a passing out parade. So I sat on the side waiting for this to finish. I went home for the weekend and got back to services school, and a signal arrived saying I was successful with my application for pilot training. Went to the Pointons building to do the paperwork, sign away your life, as they say. Whereafter we went to the gym, got SAAF uniform, and then, we were to report to SAAF College, where we did the initial 3 months. A couple of the guys didn't make it either. I was very lucky to make it, to be totally honest with you, because being naughty and being young and male, we found a place called Dirty Dick's, which was a strip joint of all places. Man, and I mean, you know, a young, virile South African male, we couldn't believe that women could take their clothes off on a stage. I mean, it was just impossible. In any case, halfway through officers' forming course, they called me and said, if you don't start studying now, you're off the course. This is your last warning. Well, all of a sudden, Dirty Dick's lost a lot of money because we couldn't go there anymore. And luckily, we passed the phase at SAAF College, where after all of us had to move on to the Donata. Excuse me. I think we were one of the biggest courses since the Second World War. And we were approximately 65 guys that arrived at Donata. We did the ground phase, obviously exam following exam following exam. And just before we arrived at Donata, there was an aircraft crash apparently the impeller bearing failed and the engine seized, flicking the harvard on its back. And these two guys, I can't remember their names now, they crashed just after takeoff, killing both of them instantly. So the whole Harvard fleet was grounded for them to find out what was wrong. And we managed to finish almost all our exams, theory exams, before we even started flying. I've always said that's probably why I passed the NOTA, because we actually had 2 courses instead of 1. We got to the flights eventually after the senior course left, and I was allocated to Lieutenant Gustav Kruger, and he became my first instructor. I have to say that if it wasn't for Gus, I probably wouldn't have been a pilot, because Gus was very easygoing, but he also instilled a lot of discipline in us. And I think flying, you do need a lot of discipline to become a good aviator. Sadly, my co-pup, Hercules Kluter, he got as far as 60 hours during training, and he started doing some weird stuff, and Gustav really tried to help him. Eventually, Gustav said to me, "You will only fly in the afternoon, and Hercules will only fly in the morning." Well, I thought, if you've got a pup that doesn't perform, you'll give him the afternoon slot and give your star pup the morning. And in the meantime, Gus had it the other way around, and he really tried his best to get Hercules to pass. Sadly, he didn't, and at the 60-hour test, he failed and was sent packing. We got to the end of the NOTA, and I went for my annual medical. Why, I don't know then, because I only had it done 6 months before. But while I was away, they actually allocated us our postings from the NOTA. We had a form that we had to fill in, and there were 5 options given to us: fighters, transport, maritime, light aircraft, and helicopters. And I know you're an old helicopter boy, but if there's one thing I don't want to fly, it's a helicopter. I need to see the wings. I don't trust these things that swirl above you. In any case, so that's what I put in, and I got the helicopters. I had to go and fly helicopters according to them. Where I got the bravery, or whatever you want to call it, the stupidity maybe, but I went to Commandant Haasbroek, who was the second in charge of the chief instructor. And I said to him, "Commandant, if you don't send me to Impalas, I'm not going. I'm not going to go and fly helicopters." Well, the old boy picked up a nervous twitch. I tell you what, his whole face was jumping up and down. That's how angry he was with me. And he sent me packing. About a week later, my posting was changed, and I could go and fly Impalas, because one of the guys had failed his navigation test. And I always said to guys, that shows you how brilliant the SAAF thought. Because here's a guy that fails his low-level navigation exercise on a Harvard, and they then post him to go and fly helicopters. Well, you always fly low-level. The mind boggles. In any case, so off I went to Langebaanweg. At this one, there was no accident to help us. So it really was a tough course, doing theory and starting to fly the Impala. And the little Mampara, as it's called, it's a little trainer, but it's at least 3 times as fast as a Harvard. So all of a sudden, things happen a bit quicker. And if there's one thing I've learned in my life in flying with different guys, some guys can adapt to higher speeds and some people simply can't. And the Impala was really, how can I call it? It weeded out the boys from the men. The course went fine until I got to my first flying test. And Martin Rutsch was the 2IC of Langebaanweg, a commandant at that stage. And he sat there as my testing instructor. Excuse me. I was the only little pup that was tested by the commandant of the base. Unfortunately, the test didn't go that well, according to him. And as we were busy doing the debriefing, he would say to me, Walter, you made a mistake here and you made a mistake there. And when he said it the third time, I just had enough. I said, Commandant, sir, I'm sorry, but that's the way I was trained. You can't mark me down if I did something exactly the way I was trained. Later on, he gave me quite a low mark, but at least I passed. The second test was the IF test. And lots of things went wrong even before we got airborne. And I was really flustered during the test, and I failed the test. And then we learned that he had a phone call from the guy at the Not Haasbroek. So they were obviously telling him, watch this little lad because he is trouble. Luckily for me, my instructors, then I had to go and do extra training, and Major Mitzmaritz gave me my second test for IF, and I scored over 80% for the second test. Now, there's no ways that you can improve that much in 2 periods of extra training. In any case, after that, I never ever encountered Martin Rutsch again in a test. And after the course was finished, I was told that he came around and always asked to test me. He was out to get me. I did my night flying test, and but the mark that I received was in the high 90s. It was nearly a full score. And being the wonderful person that he is or was, he actually remarked my test form and gave me 85%, so that I couldn't get exceptional on my final results. Well, I hope he enjoyed himself. In any case, that was Langebaanweg. I managed to scrape through and pass it. And the last day that we were there, I actually took all our clearing out forms and ran around for every signature to be placed upon it of all the guys. I got to his office and he looked at me, and with glee, he said to me, you know, some people come first on course and some people come last. And I looked at him and he said, you didn't come first. And I just thought, you know, if that makes you happy, be my guest. I got the signatures, and it was the quickest I ever got off the base, was Langebaanweg. I went back to 44 Squadron because my marks weren't all that hot. It was the end of my aspirations to become a JJOC, or a fighter pilot, if you want to call it that. And I had to go and fly Dakotas. There were 4 of us that went to Dakotas, Len Marsenkamp, Wim van der Water, Russell Foster, and myself. And then another one of our course joined quite quickly, or quite early on the course as well. He was supposed to go to Impalas, but he was also moved to the Dakotas. Sorry. There's one other thing. I've got to tell you, Russell Foster. I did my navigation test, and I packed all my charts away, hoping to keep it for prosperity. And the next thing, I got called to the window, and one of the instructors said to me, he wants all my charts. So I went and fetched it. I'm trying to think what his name was. In any case, Russell Foster went and did his nav test, and this guy followed him on my charts all the way around on this nav, the low-level nav exercise, and we all went low in this one riverbed. And Russell did the same. Oh yeah, Jan Brandewyn van Zyl was his name, or is his name. He followed him all the way around, and when he landed back, man, all hell broke loose. They actually wanted to wash poor Russell. At the end of the day, during our wings dance that night, he walked up to him and said to him, Captain, why did you have your knife in for me? And he said to him, when you were at SAAF college, you said something bad to an officer's wife. And Russell said to him, but it wasn't me, sir. My surname is Foster, but there was another Foster on course with me, and he was a navigator's spew. So all this time, poor Russell was being nailed for somebody else that did something. I mean, you must have encountered it as well in the Air Force, you know, the grapevine. It's amazing how stories go around, and not all of them are the truth. In any case, so we passed the course, and I was sent to as I said, to Dakotas. Went to 44 Squadron, and I got there in January 1982. We were at the squadron for approximately 2 weeks, going to the T stores where you got your flying equipment, and I got the what I can't say coveted, but the flying jacket, the old blue one with a day glow on the inside. And man, all of a sudden, and you were now a lieutenant, so all of a sudden you were part of the Air Force. You weren't a lowly CO anymore. We spent about a week at 44, and they said to us, you got to get yourself to Bloemfontein, to Bloemspruit, because there's a C47 conversion. Len Marsenkamp and myself was at 44, and the other 3 guys of our course, one of 80, was in Cape Town. So a week later, we all met in Bloemfontein at Bloemspruit, and we were introduced to the members of 86 multi-engine flying school. Now, my old instructor, Gus Kruger, was my instructor, myself and Lenz, and a guy by the name of Grant Brooks. Giel Woon was the OC. I'm trying to think who the other guys were. But they were all really, really good men, and they really treated us quite well. And we got introduced to the old Goonie bird. Now, at that stage, the SAAF had about 4 or 5 different cockpits in a C-47, because they were trying to upgrade them to a certain standard. But as fast as what they were upgrading some of them, they were acquiring other C-47s around the world. And some of them still had the Second World War flying instrument panel. The one of them had a RBI, which is a relative bearing indicator. And poor Gus had to teach us how to fly instrument flying on an RBI, on a more modern navigation equipment. So it was, every day was quite hilarious. The course took approximately, I think, 60 hours to complete. And part of the 60 hours, we had to do a long navigation exercise where they gave us an exercise from Pretoria, where we had to fly Defence Force passengers. And Len and myself and Gus Kruger flew the Army general. I'm trying to think what his name was. Jannie Geldenhuys. We flew him from Pretoria to PE, and then to Cape Town, and then back to Pretoria. And it was about a whole week that we spent on this cruise around Africa, South Africa, and it was quite an eye-opener as to what the transport guys actually did compared to the rest of the Air Force. We completed the course, and then Len Marsenkamp and myself, being the youngest and wanting to get to 44, which they felt was a bit overstocked with the personnel, we had to stay behind and become station pilots at 86 multi-engine flying school. Being a station pilot, or as they say in Afrikaans, a Stasi sled, which I won't translate into English. In any case, being part of Bloemfontein, we got to know the parabats quite well, because every year they've got 2 courses, and the June course was busy with their parachute training. And man, I got to know New Tempe like the back of my hand. I mean, you flew around in that circuit every day, 5 days of the week for 3 months. It was just never ending. Well, funny part, maybe not so funny. During this stage, I was seeing a little English girl in Bloemfontein, of all places, and she had a cousin that was actually training to become a parabat. He jumped out of the aircraft one day, and he had 2 line overs over his parachute, and he tried to save himself by deploying the emergency parachute, and he made something went wrong, and it actually folded up one half of the parachute that was available. He went down like a sack of bricks. He hit the ground so hard that his chin broke his breastbone, and vice versa. He was really in a bad place. And I actually sat, and when you do a parrot, you drop a stick of bats, you count them as the shoots deployed, so that you know that they're all okay. And this day, as I was counting, I just saw this puff of dust in the free state, that red dust, and one was missing, and it was obviously him. And I got to this girl that night, and I was, making a joke about paratroopers, and I said, well, this one guy fell himself to near death, and she looked at me very sternly and said, that's my cousin. So the romance has stopped right there. In any case, Bloemfontein Parabats, the next course we had to start with. We were sitting in the right seat when the guys went solo, and so forth and so forth. And it was about September, I would say, and there was a flight out that 86 had to man, and that was an entertainment group that went through the operational area. So two of us were seconded, and we flew up with a Mooney from Bloemfontein to Swartkops, and Grant Brooks was my skipper. And the Monday morning, we picked up the Irish singer, what's her name? Geraldine Brannigan. And she and Mari van Sail was going to go through the whole operational area, giving shows every night to the soldiers that was at that stage in the operational area. We flew up to Mapacha, and then I'll tell you what, we were nearly carried off the aircraft and taken into the pub, typical SAAF style. It became a free fall, and everything was paid for by the tobacco people. So my first night in the operational area, I tell you what, was the biggest party I've ever been to, and everything was for free as well. Next day we flew to Rundu. Same thing happened again. Then to Ondangwa. We had a very interesting day the next day and traveled by road to Oshakati. The air crew stayed with an entertainment group. The next day we flew to Ruakana, then to Grootfontein, and then back home. So I saw the whole operational area in 1 week. And I thought the operational area was the best place in the world. Well, little did I know. And I soon, when I got back there for the nitty-gritty of the whole thing, it was a total different ballgame, let me tell you. But I was living in a dream world at that stage, that's for sure. In any case, the year ended, and Len and myself was posted to 44 Squadron. But just before we were set to go, a new signal arrived, and it said to us that two of us must go to navigation school. Sorry, navigation school was then at Langebaan again. So Fido Crossy was the man's name, and the boss of 25 Squadron didn't want Fido and Cox lad, Steve Cox, on his squadron, because they were naughty as navigators at 28 Squadron when he flew there. And therefore, Fido and myself was posted to navigation school. I stayed there flying navigator pupils around the Western Cape, out over the Atlantic. It was horrendous. It was the most soul-destroying flying I ever did in my life. And the one day that we flew, we were out at the furthest point of the navigation exercise. And as I looked back towards the navigator, I couldn't see him. The whole aircraft was filled with smoke, and some of the instruments were packing up. We switched everything off to try and get the electricity as far removed from what was happening inside the aircraft as possible. And we turned east, and we aimed to hit the coast of Africa somewhere. Well, we hit the coast halfway from Cape Town to Sea Point. Now, you just think how close we got to missing the whole damn African continent. We would have disappeared in the Indian Ocean and nobody would have known. about us. But luckily we hit land and we turned left and landed at Langebaanweg. Now, there's a story that I forgot to tell you that I have to mention, and that's being at Langebaanweg. As a pupil pilot, we had to do training on ejecting out of an imp. So we did the thing on the pole that they shot this chair up, this pole, as high as you would they would let it go. And we all had to do that. And then we had to go and do sea survival. Because once you eject out of the aircraft, and two of the sectors were over the ocean, and if you land up in the water, you have to know what it's going to, well, I don't think you have to know how it's going to feel like, but for the instructors, it was a jolly to go fishing. And we went on the SAS Flamingo. And that morning, I think it was the 7th of July or August, they dropped us off about probably 20 sea miles to the west of Saldanha. Now, I tell you what, the water was cold. The first guy went in, and I'll never forget it. He came up, and his cheeks were white. His chin was white, and his cheek was red. That's how cold the water was. And I looked at this, and I thought, oh. And the second guy was Derek Glass. He came up, and he started breathing quite badly. And I thought, man, today's going to be interesting. And I was number 3 in the water. And to say I wasn't disappointed was true. That water was cold. We spent about 2 hours hugging each other in the water while the instructors were fishing. They actually forgot about us. Then they put on one-man dinghies that was actually Timexed, or time expired. And half these things didn't work. So when we all got into these dinghies, we were still sitting in the water. At the end of the day, they took us back into the lagoon, and we had to jump into the water again. I nearly didn't. It was the first day and the only day that I nearly said, this is enough. I'm not going to continue with this. I jumped in last, and I was at the dinghies first. And then we had to get in the water and be hoisted out by helicopter, by Allos. And that was the end of that exercise. I'll never forget, I got into a shower, and it was cold water, and that cold water was burning my skin. That's how cold I was. Derek Glass, that went in second into the water, the first time he got into an Impala to fly, when they climbed through 8,000 feet, he passed out. And they found out that when he jumped into the water, his lungs, the sides actually parted. And he had a problem with his lungs. He was grounded, and later on, he got his wings a couple of years later because of that exercise. Just makes you think the sanity of the SAAF sometimes. But where were we? We were at 44 Squadron. Well, actually at 86 still. As I said, being at 86, 1982, at the end of the year, we did the whole thing. I went down to Langebaanweg to become a taxi driver for the nav pubes. And as I said, it was quite a brain dead operation, but somebody had to do it. And Oom Hugo got to Langebaanweg to talk to the instructors to see where they wanted to go after their tours at Langebaanweg. And I cornered him to one side. I said, please, Commandant, can't I get out of here? I've been a year as a station pilot at Bloemfontein, and I'm now here as a station pilot. And his answer to me was, Walter, one day when you're a DAC commander and you fly down to Cape Town and the weather is bad, you won't have to worry to divert to Langebaanweg. Now, I'll tell you what, in my book, if ever there was a brain dead statement, that was the one. But you had to grin and smile and do it. At the end of the day, I got back to 44 Squadron, and De Prier, Commandant De Prier, Boy De Prier was the boss. At the end of the year, 82, 83, Commandant Boy De Prier, who had flown a couple of flights with me, said I must be put up to become a commander on Dakotas. Now, at that stage, no lieutenant was allowed to become a skipper on DACs because De Leeuw was the guy's name. He was a lieutenant, and 2 lieutenants went and did instrument flying training at Grootfontein. They took the ops clerk with them, and trying to impress them or impress her, the 2 guys had her sit in the seat, and apparently Lieutenant De Leo tried to do a loop with the deck. Sadly for him, the loop wasn't completed and he hit the ground, and all 3 of them died in the crash. So therefore, the SAAF decided in their wisdom that no lieutenant should become a skipper on a deck again. 44 was running short of skippers, and Commandant de Pre decided that I should be put up for my command checks. I did my my night flying test, which I passed quite well, with a guy that eventually died in the aircraft crash, and Yetzanin, flying for the CAA. And then ex-Rhodesian pilot took over my tests, and he felt that no lieutenant should get a command. He felt that lieutenants was not worthy of being a skipper on a deck, a small deck of all things, and he tried his best to fail me. When I did my instrument flying test, he said to me, I don't have to do certain of the exercises, and then when we landed back, he marked me down on these exercises that I never even flew, so that I failed the test. And being in the SAAF and having been treated so nicely up until then, I just thought, you know what, be my guest. I got posted for a bush tour at Grootfontein, and I arrived at 28 Squadron to fly up with a C1 on the Monday, and here was Colin Green. He was my co-pilot. I said, but you can't go up. I'm the co-pilot. He said, no, I am your co-pilot. I said, what do you mean? He says, you're going up as a commander. I said, I'm not a commander. So we landed at Ondangwa. I went to, I think it wasn't Mitsmaritz. I can't remember, but it was an older Mirage pilot. I went to him. I said to him, Commandant, I'm Walter Weiss. There's 2 of us here, 2 lieutenants. We're both first officers. We're not skippers. I don't know what we're going to do. They phoned 44 Squadron all the way from Ondangwa, and how can I put it? The whole story started unfolding, and I'm trying to think now. What was the guy's name? His dad was a general, and he went to the commandant and told him the whole story, why I failed my command upgrade, and all hell broke loose at 44 Squadron. And Boy de Pre said, that man is a skipper as of from today, and the paperwork was signed, and the person that failed me was posted off the squadron. So all of a sudden, I had my first command flights on a DC3 in the operational area. It was an amazing 2 weeks with Colin Green, and we got home and everything was fixed, and the offending guy was posted to 28 Squadron. I did another year until 84. I was at, until the end of 84, I was at 44 Squadron. And being inquisitive, one night we were standing in the pub at Waterkloof, and the guys were telling a story that 28 Squadron was actually looking for pilots. Now, at that stage, 28 Squadron was quite top-heavy when it came to rank, because most of the skippers on C1s were commandants, and most of the co-pilots were majors. So lieutenants and captains were overlooked for postings to that squadron. And at that stage, I was still a lieutenant. But during the discussion in the pub, it was said that no one wants to go to 28 Squadron because they are top-heavy. The juniors didn't feel happy to, to sit in a tea room with all these high brass. It was just not the done thing. In any case, being stupid and being from the Western Transvaal, I called HQ. Saki was the commandant's name. I can't remember his surname. He died in the bomb. I called him and I said to him, who are you looking for as co-pilots on C160s? And he really laid into me. He said to me, "Who gave you the right to even call me?" So I said, "Sir, thank you very much. I just wanted to know. And I'm sorry that I wasted your time." And I put the phone down. Well, it wasn't an hour later, and Commandant Boyd de Pre called me into his office and managed to jump all over me for being so forward as to phoning headquarters. A week later, there was a signal out that they needed a Mayot in Luatla for Thunder Chariot. Guess who was volunteered to be the Mayot from 44 Squadron? So off I went to Luatla for a month on exercises with the army. Well, that was an eye-opener of note. During the exercise, I was actually allocated to the Irish Regiment. And the Cobra 1 was the objective that they had to attack at night. And I warned them, I said, Impala jocks, they can stop. You guys better be careful. And you know, those exercises, they use live ammunition. Sadly, that afternoon, the Impala guys rolled in on the front line of troop markings, the flot, because they asked that the Vitfos, the white phosphorus grenade, shouldn't have been thrown onto the target. And when the 4th Impala was in the attack dive, the one guy that was one up in the Mayots, in his rattle, screamed, "Break off, break off, break off." And the guys actually broke off mere seconds before launching their missiles on their own troops. Luckily, that was prevented, and the guys came in again and did the attack. And I told the commanding officer of the Irish Regiment what happened. And the next time they walked in for the next exercise, I was fitted with a radio on my front and on my back, and I had to carry these damn things the whole night for my stupidity of telling him what happened. In any case, so I went to Luatla for a month. I came back to the squadron, and approximately November, I was called to the operations room by Linda Roberts, and she said to me, "Here's your signal." And I said, "What signal?" She said, "Read it." And I read it, and it said, as of with effect the 1st of January, the following lieutenants were promoted to captains. She said to me, no, read the whole signal. And down below was the following officers are posted. And I saw my name on the list being posted to 28 Squadron. So that's how I got to get to 28 Squadron, still actually as a lieutenant, but I got promoted to being a captain on the 1st of January, the day, I think I joined the squadron about the 2nd or the 3rd. Carlos de Silveira was the one guy, Joe Gyro de Vet, and myself and Gary Goldschmidt was the 4 guys that went on to C160s. Now, as I said before, 28 Squadron was quite top heavy when it came to rank. So us lowly little junior officers, we tried to make ourselves as small as possible. I got trained by JPR de Vet. And I'm trying to think, Andre Dreyer was the flight commander, and he did my tests. I did the conversion, and I must say, JPR de Vet is probably one of the best pilots. Did the course, and then got signed out, and we started the 28 Squadron 1 week tours in the bush area. Luckily, I did quite a lot of bush tours on Dakotas for the time that I was there. So it was just adapting to new speeds of the C160. The rest was about the same. Low flying, the C160 with the skippers that we had, they didn't want to fly that low. I think they were more adult about the whole thing. Just a quick story about Dakotas. We did a pamphlet drop one day in the area of Rundu. And I flew to Rundu. the co-pilot, Neil Crossy, he flew out towards the east. And then we came back on the Kabongo River. And he flew nicely and low. And the next flight was out towards the west. And obviously I had to outdo him. And on the way back over that river, man, we were low. We were so low that the loadmaster was looking out the paratrooping door. And he said, Lieutenant, you better pull up a bit because you're blowing the local population out of their wattus. Now, you have to be quite low to do that. And it was just the way we flew. I mean, you being a helicopter pilot, you know, it was a different, it was a war that was so different that even trying to explain it to other people today, they just don't know what we're talking about. Another story, talking about Dakotas, also with Neil Crossy, we were part of a contact where when the DAC was armed with a 20mm gun, initially they tried to help to get us to be involved in the exercises. And this day, it was Kufut that was following up Spoor, and there were 2 allows below us. And we had a grandstand seat and watching this whole episode unfold. And how the Kufut guys caught up with the TERS, or the SWAPO members, is not as bad as being part of the action for the ground soldiers. But it's still, you know, it makes the what do you call it, the value of life so much smaller in what we experienced. On another one, on DAX again, we were to patrol an area to the southeast of Ondangwa, and they had a beat line go through the area, soldiers, because they believed there were SAM 7s in the area. And they had 2 allows and us in the DAC flying around this whole area, and we had to patrol the northern area, the northern side of this whole area that was being searched, and we had to stop the TERS if they would run away. Now, how the heck would we have been able to see them? Why didn't they put a stopper group of soldiers on the northern line as well? So I think if there were SWAPO guys, I bet you they got away that day. That's just quickly going back to 44. Okay, Vossie, so 28 Squadron and bush tours, you know. As I said before, we did a week tour at a time. And there was the late Okkie Engelbrecht, also a big boy. He had a mishap at Iondi during one of the operations. And he landed deep with a DAC, and it was summertime. And he had to disengage the tail lock, and he had to ground loop the DAC to stop it from running into the choppers that was the helicopters, the Pumas and Allows that were parked in the riverbed. So old Okkie was also, he was also one of the better pilots that I ever flew with. And we ended up becoming a heck of a good friends. Major Okkie Engelbrecht and his wife Rina, a very good lady. And Malan Pinar was a navigator at that stage. And the 3 of us weren't the smallest of boys they were, even at 28 Squadron. And we ended up on this bush tour. And at that stage, if you didn't fly in the bush, being back at the squadron, there weren't a lot of flying. So to keep your hand in, you know, I was always trying to get flying wherever I could. And on this specific bush tour, I said to Okkie, you know, we don't fly. And he said to me, Walter, you can fly as much as you want to this tour. You can do all the legs. And we did fly quite a lot on that tour. And we had barbecues at night. So it was a great tour. And then this one day, we ended up back at Ruakana doing paratrooping from Umega, where the Bushmans were. So we were, what were they, 101 Battalion, I think? We were flying them from Umega to Ruakana, of all places. And we got there quite late in the afternoon. And the sun, as you know, the Namibian sun nowadays, or West African sun then, had heated up those tarmac runways like you can't believe. And I flared the C1 for the touchdown. Sorry. And this day, I just managed to get the aircraft what is called ground effect. Now, that's when the wingtip vortices of the wings gets pushed into the ground. So the vortice can't form. So you've got a lot less drag on the wing. And this aircraft just didn't want to settle, and the wheels touch. So we were floating down this runway, and I was trying my damnedest to get the wheels on the ground, and she just refused. And halfway down the runway, I'll never forget, Aoki looked at me and said, I suppose it's better to go around now, isn't it? And I just went around, and we landed, and offloaded the guys, and that was the last trooping leg of the day. And I'll never forget, it was actually dark in the operational area, and we took off in the dark, only the C1 landing light showing us where the runway was. We got airborne and we turned south, and we landed back at Grootfontein that night and had another barbecue as before. Talking about barbecues, a story that I have to share, maybe not a good story, is also back on DAX, flying with Mel Pinar. And we were doing what was called the rum run. Now, the rum run was where the big bases were resupplied with food by air because of all the landmines and whatever. And the rum run was done on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And on a Friday, it was meat day. So they filled the aircraft with boxes of 11 kilograms worth of hartsleaf meat from Southwest Africa. And Mel looked at this, and he looked at me, and there was a loadmaster by the name of Proppy. And he said to us, guys, I think we should have a barbecue tonight. So see if you can squeeze a box or two during the day's flying. Well, I did as I was told. So I squeezed the box on every leg, and I hid it in the hiding areas of the deck. We landed back that night at Ondangwa. As a matter of fact, I think it was one of the first tours that the Dakota could actually stay over at night at Ondangwa. And 44, we had to share a bungalow, I think, with light aircraft. We had the bungalow in between the light aircraft pilots and the engineers as you went out the gate to go to the ops room. And we landed back, and Mel said, okay, let's go and get the little pickup truck and get our stuff and go back to our bungalow. Well, the next thing, Proppy was in the aircraft, and he brought out 4 boxes of meat. I looked at this funny, and I went and fetched my 3 boxes of meat. And Mel came back, and he fetched these 3 boxes of meat out of the aircraft. Where the hell we got the hiding place, I don't know. And how we didn't choose the same hiding places is even more of a mystery. But there we sat with 110 kilos of meat. Prime rump, prime fillet. I think I stole a box of sausage. And I have to say sorry to the poor soldiers that didn't get their food for the next week. But boy, we got back to the bungalow, and here was a mountain of meat. And we didn't have, at that stage, the helicopter guys had their fridges and whatever. I think even the flummies had a fridge in their bungalow. But being the new kids on the block, we had nothing. So we looked at this and said, we better invite the other boys, because we can't, you can't keep the meat. So we invited everybody, all the helicopter guys and engineers, all the light aircraft guys, and we all stood there and we looked at this meat and we said, we ain't going to eat this. So after a long deliberation, we decided we'll also invite the flummies, and they were also invited to the braai. And we still looked at this and we said, man, there's no ways we're going to eat all of this meat. So we invited the doctors from the sick bay across the road. We went and got the trimmings from the mess. There was quite a raucous party that night there in the living area. And I can still remember that the late Rick York had one of the doctors on his shoulders, and the doctor was filling his mouth with pips of mealies, yellow mealie pips, and he was spitting all over everybody, mouths full of these pips. So it was really a party. And after that, we had quite a good understanding with the doctors. So by so, that the doctor that was sitting on Mick's shoulder said to him, the next week, their replacements would arrive at Ondangwa. And if they couldn't organize them a flight on a Puma, as a welcoming gesture or whatever, then the whole thing went haywire. And Mick York decided that he would put on the doctor's uniform and the doctor would put on Mick's uniform. And they got the doctors in early that morning, and Mick was briefed quite well. And he actually took the doctors through the wards and discussed every patient that was there, like a real doctor. He came across as Dr. Mick York. And that afternoon, Mick York said, well, let me go and introduce you to the SAAF boys. And there was the doctor sitting in his oversized flying overall from Mick. And they said, well, Mick, here's the guys. Would you mind to take them would you mind to take him for the flight? And out walked the doctor with his overall. And Mick walked beside him. And in earshot of these guys, he said to Mick, you know what, Mick, I've taken you for so many flights on a Puma. Why don't you take the flight today? You can fly them around. And Mick got into that seat that afternoon. It was late afternoon. But when he got airborne, you could see the doctors were in for a surprise. When a Puma normally takes off, the nose dips and it goes forward, not Mick. The tail dipped and they went backwards. That's how they got airborne. And they gave those doctors about a 15-minute flight that I don't think any one of them would have ever forgotten that. I bet you they will still remember it today. Now, that's what we got up to at Ondangwa. As you can see, war was hell sometimes, that was, again, just a quick reflection of life on Dakotas. In any case, getting back to C160s, it was much more regimented, and the guys were older. It was a total different ballgame. And being a junior officer, it was quite difficult because there was a new flight commander. I'm trying to think of his name, Piet Kotzenberg. And Piet, man, me being the only captain, I was always the scribe during all these meetings that he had. And he loved meetings. So I was always busy with damn admin work at the squadron. Then, at the end of the day, I got, I think it was 800 hours that you had to have on the C1s before they would even think of you as a skipper. And Andre Dreyer said, you better get yourself ready for your command checks. I said, well, let's try this. And I can still remember we were in the bush. We were at Grootfontein, and a week at Grootfontein. And he said to me, today we're going to do your IF test here at Grootfontein. We got airborne, and that afternoon, he put me through my paces. So that years later, we were discussing things with the local population of Grootfontein. And the one guy said, this specific day, this transfer looked as if it was crashing all the time. And really, it was quite an interesting flight test. I got back to the squadron, just trying to think who did all my tests. But I became the youngest ever commander on C160s at 28 Squadron. So here I was, a captain in rank, but also the captain of the aircraft. And now my co-pilots were the majors and even commandants. I'm trying to think now of the specific commandant's name. He became a colonel or whatever. He passed away of a heart attack. A very, very good guy. And him and myself were at Rundu on a Rundu tour. And the Rundu tour had finished, and Malan Pinar was the navigator. He was a major. And we were going home that morning. And the soldiers walked up to us and said, they actually walked up to the commandant. And they stomped their feet, like typical army guys. They saluted him. And they said, sir, can we get a seat back to the States, please? And the commandant said, well, you better ask the boss. And they looked at the bunch of people standing there, and the next one was the major. So they walked up to Milan Pidar and they stomped their feet again. And they said, Major, can we get a lift with you? And he said, you may better ask the boss. And they looked around and they only found me as an officer. And they came in front of me and said, well, can we take a lift back with you? And I said, yeah, sure, climb in. And you could see they just didn't understand. The poor army guys couldn't understand that rank actually meant nothing in an aeroplane, or in a SAAF aircraft at least. And we managed to get home. Okay, and then in 1985 was the punch up at Mavinga, where Fapla got very close to overrunning Savimbi. For us that were there, the battle was so close to the runway that there was a huge amount of smoke in the sky because of the veld getting on fire and the explosions and whatever. So when we did the resupplying into Mavinga, we could only approach Mavinga from the eastern side, because if you approach from the west, we would overfly the Fapla positions and they would hear the aircraft firstly and they might try and shoot it down. And we were trying to stay as quiet as possible and not for them to know that we were resupplying UNITA with the ammunition. At that stage, we were only flying rockets, the Valkyrie rockets, into Mavinga, because that was the days before the G5. Now, I tell you, when you walk into the back of a C1 and it's about head out, head high in rockets, you know, those boxes lying there, it's quite an interesting sight. In any case, with Jannie de Wet, I learned how to do low visibility approaches. It was really, really an eye-opener, I can say. But we managed to land on a dirt strip at night, no aids whatsoever, with all this ammunition at the back. And we kept the whole war effort going. I really think that without 28 Squadron resupplying, I don't think Savimbi would have been able to hold out as long as he did. And at one stage, we were 3 aircraft flying simultaneous approaches into Mavinga at night for the whole night. And you went up to Rundu. We flew from Rundu to Mavinga. And you spent 7 days at Rundu. And we were sleeping in a tent in the middle of the summer in Rundu, which is not the coldest of places, while they were busy building roads right next to where we were trying to sleep. It was horrendous. We just didn't get any rest. Then they moved us to a bungalow, army bungalow. And I'm trying to think, it was part of the Omega group, you know, the soldiers from Omega. And we slept there. And then one morning, we just landed back. We just had our breakfast, and we were getting into bed. And Earp was the general, and his brother Errol Earp was there that week with us. And we were sitting there, and Brigadier Thackeray were walking past with the general, when he said, I'll never forget the words. He said, General, this is where 28 Squadron are sleeping, and they're doing a sterling job. And Earp, being who he was, he said, well, it's about time they start working. Well, like one man, we all sat up. We couldn't believe that he could say that. And you know, how am I going to put this? Well, there's going to be a bit of a swear coming on here. But we had a sign like this. And the word starts with a C. But what a C he is, you see. And we all sat up in bed, and all of us went like that with a signal. And it was quite hilarious. And Errol, the boss's brother, did exactly the same. In any case, that was just Mavinga. Yeah, so the first time was 85. I was a co-pilot still. And I did my fair bit at the end of the whole operation. Then in 86, 87, I got my command. And now I was the youngest at the squadron. And then in 87 was the second punch-up, Modular, Packer, and Hooper. And I lived in the bush area, because being the youngest, you were always in the operational area. And I did quite a lot of flights into Mavinga, flying. At that stage, we were flying everything and everything into Mavinga, and mostly, again, the Valkyrie rockets, and then the G5 rounds. And the whole back of the aircraft was filled with G5 rounds, and the fuses of the rounds were actually strapped to the ramp. There weren't space on the floor of the aircraft for it. While doing these exercises, in '85, one major got beheaded by a C160 as he ran up from behind, and he tried to get into the door, and he ran right through the propeller. And the propeller actually decapitated him. Chris Raby was the skipper. He flew the aircraft out. They actually opened up power on the engine with the bent propellers until the vibrations nearly shook the damn engine off the wing, and then they slowly closed the power lever until the aircraft's engine was in limits, and that's how they got airborne that night in the dark in Mavinga. He got back home. They wanted to court-martial him, and whatever, luckily they didn't. But I think if ever there was one C160 skipper that had to get a HC, that was him, and he was overlooked. Because of that, they changed the operations with the C160s, that no one was allowed to get close to the aircraft, because the C130 shut down the motors when they landed at Mavinga. But the C160 has got a valve that if that valve doesn't open, the hydraulic power doesn't get taken away from the APU, and it doesn't supply enough power to start the engines. The 106K valve, I'll never forget that. In any case, so in their wisdom, the SAAF decided that the aircraft will never shut the motors down. And that's why that one guy was decapitated. And in '87, they didn't allow anybody on the aircraft as well, except that if they flew somebody in, they had to run out the back of the aircraft and keep on running for a certain amount of meters before they could turn left or right. This night, we flew in rockets, and the Mayot, I'm trying to think what his name is. In any case, he got on board of the aircraft, and there was a signal out stating that no ground personnel is allowed close to the aircraft. Koos Luke was the co-pilot. Eysterlong Tron was the flight engineer. In any case, they never told me, because what we did at that stage is we kneeled the aircraft. A transl can lower the back end of the aircraft. And what we did was you pushed the pallets with a cargo out the back of the aircraft. There were three little arms that was fitted to the back of the ramp. And these pallets could go onto the ground without a bump even. I mean, they even had, during exercises, they had a tray with a bottle of champagne and champagne glasses on it. And it went out smoothly, and it ended up on the ground. So what you had to do is you had to push this all these pallets next to each other. Once the whole load was at the back of the aircraft, all you had to do was open up the power, and the aircraft would actually taxi from under the weight of the load, and you will deposit this load in Mavinga, for instance. Well, this night we did exactly the same. As a matter of fact, Andre van Zyl and myself had the record. We offloaded a transl from touchdown to takeoff was 6 minutes. Now that takes some doing. In any case, this night Luke was with me, and they did their thing at the back. The next thing, the flight engineer ran into the cockpit and he said to me, Captain, there's a problem. I said, Niels, what is wrong? He says to me, well, the Mayot is missing. I said, who cares? What about the Mayot? He says, sir, the Mayot is missing. I said, what do you mean? He said, the Mayot was on board of the aircraft, and he disappeared when the load went out. Well, I said to him, you stay here, let me just go to the back and see what's happening there. I walked to the back, and in the lights of the aircraft, you could see this row of pallets lying there with the rockets on top of them, and in the middle was this bump where the pallets actually lifted. I walked to the back. I walked back to the cockpit, and I said, "Well, Neil, shut down the engines. Here's trouble." By this stage, one of the loadmasters had organized. There was one forklift at Mavinga, and they lifted, luckily, the right pallet that had to be lifted. They lifted the pallet, and the Mayot was lying in the center of this row of pallets. And the pallet that they lifted up actually freed his head and his torso and his middle. And only from the knees down were still trapped under the next pallet. I looked down and I thought, but this might not be the Mayot. That might be a local a soldier from UNITA because he was African. And then I looked at his shoulders and I saw the blue pips, and I realized he was Air Force. The weight of that load of rockets actually squeezed him so much that his body turned black. It was amazing to see, or probably blue, but in the dark light you couldn't really see. So I got some soldiers that was lying there next to the runway waiting for transport, and we moved all the rockets from the second pallet. We actually threw it off, and quite a few of these rockets were actually damaged. And then one of the loadmasters went and looked amongst the people lying next to the runway waiting for transport to the front, and they found the doctor that flew in the Casevacs for the Joburg General Hospital. Now talk about luck. This guy came and helped us. By this stage, we had the guy freed from everything, and he got himself, the flight engineer, and one of the loadmasters and myself lifted the Mayot. And as I put my arms under his leg, from the knee down, there was no more leg left. One of those protrusions that were behind the ramp actually ran over his leg. It was pulverized. There was nothing left. So we strapped him to a bed, and we got going for Rundu. About halfway to Rundu, he started waking up, and I could hear him scream from the back of the aircraft all the way to the cockpit over the aircraft noise because of the pain of his leg. They pumped him full of morphine, and they flew him back to Pretoria. His leg was amputated twice, apparently, and luckily he went back to flying. Apparently, for years after that, he blamed me for the loss of his leg, that he lost his leg, which I find most interesting. But we had a discussion eventually, and yeah, let's just say he knows now what happened to him. Another story about the C160 at Mavinga. Oh yeah, we flew out, captured equipment. They captured an M46 artillery piece, and we loaded in the Transal. And I'll tell you what, she didn't want to fly, but she did. And we got this thing back, and they said to us the artillery piece weighed 7,000 pounds. I went into some military books that I had, and I looked up the weight of this damn artillery piece, and it weighed 7,500 tons. It was more than double the weight. It was quite interesting. But the Transal flew on too. To show you what luck is all about, during one of these exercises, we came out empty out of Mavinga. Well, we were supposed to be totally empty. And as we ran down the runway towards the east, trying to get airborne, the vibration light came on the engine, on the left engine. And I looked up at this light, and this light, sometimes it came on, sometimes it didn't. But it was always just, like a blink, 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 and it's gone again. But this night, the light came on, and I realized there's something wrong here. And I was flying with Kivit Maria that night. And I said to the engineer, we were just past V1. Well, there were no V1. V1 is your reject speed in a twin or multi-engined aircraft. And if you get any failure or whatever, before V1, there's enough space on the runway for you to stop safely. Past V1, you have to go. So we had to get airborne. Not that we could stay at Mavinga, because if the aircraft was left there in the daytime, the MiGs would have taken it out. I said to him, shut down the engine. He shut down the motor, and we turned it for Rundu. And we tried to climb, and she didn't really want to climb. Thank God we were empty. As we turned south, there were one thunderstorm upon the next. And I looked at him, Kivit, and I said, I don't think we should sit here on one engine. I said, why don't we get that engine back on up to speed and let it just sit there and idle, and let's hope the engine don't disintegrate. I'm sad to say, as we tried to spool that engine up, she seized solidly. And that big 16 feet propeller just stopped mid-sky. The forces that was generated by the propeller actually slew the aircraft through about 45 degrees in the sky. I managed to keep her straight, and now we were truly on one. Sadly, the propeller was semi-unfeathered, so there was much more drag now. I should have just kept her there. In any case, we managed to make it back to Rundu and landed us back safely. And after landing, I was walking. It was just after daybreak, and I walked back because you could see the little line of oil on the ground as we taxied in. So there must be a little line of oil all the way from Mavinga to Rundu, somewhere in the bush there. In any case, yeah, so I was walking back to the aircraft, and here these two little army soldiers ran up to me and shook my hand vigorously. And I said to him, why are you shaking my hand? They said, no, Captain, you saved our lives last night. I said, what do you mean? They said, no, we were in the back of the aircraft. So there were these two little soldiers that was with us, and I didn't even know about it. But that was the operation in southern Angola. The war ended. I went and did, no, before I get to this, while we were fighting the war in Angola, the Helderberg went down, the South African Airways Helderberg. I was on a flight to the Tuesday. I had to fly to Rooikop, Windhoek Rooikop, and we called it the fishing trip because you had a day off. Then we used to go fishing in the Atlantic, and then fly back on the Thursday. And on this flight, there was this lovely girl, and we started seeing each other, and she became my first wife. But I think putting her in the cockpit seat on the way to Windhoek and on the way back helped me a lot to win over her heart. Yeah, sadly, we're not married anymore. In any case, so I was at her apartment after that flight. I think, if I remember correctly, it was the Saturday night. And the TV announcer announced the crash of the Helderberg on TV news. The Sunday, I was supposed to fly a policeman down to East London because of the riots, which I did. And as I landed back at Waterkloof, the ATC guy said to me, Captain Weiss, you must contact the colonel immediately after getting out of the aircraft. Well, I mean, you hardly ever get a message like that on the radio, let me tell you. So I thought, oh my goodness, you know, what did the colonel find out about my being naughty in the bush again? Got to the squadron, got into the navigator's room, because that was one of the few places that had a phone that you could phone outside of the base. And I called the colonel, and his first words were to me, Walter, something terrible has happened. And I knew I was off the hook at least. And he said to me, you heard about the Helderberg? I said, yes, sir. he said, well, tomorrow we're sending 2 transils to Mauritius, and I want you to man the second transil. And the next morning, I arrived at work with my bags packed, got on a transil, hopped across to Swartkops, picked up a Puma, and then we flew down to Durban, filled her up with fuel, and then we set sail for Mauritius. And here's a funny one. We got airborne. I was number 2 in the formation, and it was sort of a loose formation. And we were climbing out to cruising altitude. And the next thing, I saw this image of a transil in the sky, and it was as silver as if you were looking in a mirror. And there was this mirror of a transil. And the next thing we hit it, and it was actually the slipstream of this aircraft. And it is the first and only time ever in my life that I saw that image in the sky. And I think to this day, it was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me to see that image in the sky. I don't think there's any other air crew that I've ever spoken of or to that have had a similar experience. In any case, so off we went. We had a Puma at the back and some of the air crew. And we got to a beam Madagascar. And Knopiskut, the navigator, said to me, Walter, we just passed the point of no return. We now can't go back to South Africa. We have to go to Mauritius. And if you remember, in those days, it was sanctions or whatever. So we were actually not even allowed to overfly Madagascar. We had to fly past to the south. And I pressed the button on the announcement on the PA. And I said to the boys at the back, boys, we can't go back. We have to go to Mauritius. So all of us knew we had at least one night in Mauritius, and everybody cheered. We landed in Mauritius late in the afternoon, and the helicopter guys were based in a hotel quite on the southern part of the island, quite close to the airport, because the helicopters would be assembled, and then they would fly, and they would drop divers into the ocean to pick up the debris that might float. So, you know, for the what do you call it, the investigation that would follow. At that stage, we were also actually still looking for survivors. But we were housed on the northeastern side of the island, and the helicopter was assembled quite quickly that first night. The next day, the guys went out with the Navy divers in the back. They went into the hover to deposit this Navy diver in the ocean because there were stuff floating. And as they went into the hover, a shark appeared that was longer than a Puma. Well, that's what the guys say. That shark was longer than the helicopter. And the diver said, if you don't mind, I don't think I'm going to get into this water. So the helicopter flew back to Plaisance, and the helicopters were withdrawn from the search. And they said to us in the transils, well, would you mind? The whole thing has now changed. They've also by then said there were no survivors anymore. What they wanted to do was plot the debris field. They call it a burp. As the aircraft goes down into the deep ocean, and the Helderberg is one of the deepest wrecks that was found, the aircraft breaks up, and then it makes a burp. As the aircraft breaks up, whatever can floats get out of this wreck, and it floats to the top. And then it appears on the surface of the ocean in a very narrow, small spot. And as the currents and the winds take over, this spot just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger as it floats. So they tasked us to go out to the site where the Helderberg hit the water, and we had to plot these burps. And we spent approximately a week on the island plotting these burps as they were floating in the current towards Madagascar. And then we flew home. straight back to SWAT Corps. Well, I tell you, when I got back to the squadron, the guys didn't really enjoy my company, because who was I, this little upstart captain that was selected by the colonel to accompany him on this flight? And yeah, the knives were out. In any case, that was about my career on C160s. Then Giel Wynn took over, and I asked them if I could get a posting onto C130s, which Giel Wynn granted me. And I went and flew Hercs. I think I flew them for about a year and a half. Spoffy was my instructor, and Jannie de Wet also did the same thing, where he went from a Transvaal to Hercs. And it was known in the tea room that Jannie de Wet was quite arrogant, and he took the Herc guys on in the way they trained, and they didn't like the fact that a C160 commander came across to become a C130 commander, because the guys thought they know too much. Well, when I got into this conversion, I tried to act as dumb as possible, not to upset the apple cart. And Spoffy took a dim view. He said to me, "You better fly better, otherwise you ain't going to make this conversion." But I did make the conversion, and I flew Hercs, as I say, for about a year and a half. I did the flight to Marion Island from Cape Town, where we flew to Marion Island, and we had to drop medical supplies, as one of the personnel on the island got sick, and he needed the supplies quite urgently. We got to Marion, and there was a wind howling on the surface. Approximately 60 knots was measured that day on the surface. Dave Rouse was the navigator, and probably one of the best navigators I've ever flown with. And he worked out his CARP, his calculated air release point, and we were way off towards the west of the island when we released this little parachute. And Dave plotted it perfect. That parachute actually hit the ground right in the center of this little island, which I thought was quite well calculated. We then flew back to Port Elizabeth, put in fuel, and we were 3 pilots on board. I stayed behind because there was another coming through the next day that I had to catch, and then flew back to Waterkloof. Another flight we did. At that stage, it was just at the end of hostilities, and we were now the flavor of the month in Africa. And the SAS Protea went out to the north, and the captain had a heart attack, according to them, when they were near the Ivory Coast. So they put into harbor in the Ivory Coast, and we were tasked to fly up to the Ivory Coast to go and fetch the skipper of the ship. We landed there. There were 3 pilots on board: Russell S.P. Jones, myself, and Richard Beaver. And Richard was an old Rhodesian, and he knew quite about the operation in Africa. In any case, we were made to go and sleep on the SAS Protea, because the SAS Protea was seen as a SAAF mess. They wouldn't put us in a hotel because there was a SAAF mess around. So we were sleeping on the bunks where the soldiers slept, or the sailors, and they had to sleep in the passages that night to make space for us to sleep. How wise was that? In any case, the next morning, before we went with the skipper of the ship, we had to pay for the fuel and the navigation fees and everything. And Richard, being part of Africa before us, he handled the money. And at the end of the day, he gave $100 to one of the personnel in the office. And he said, "This money is for you, for helping us." Typical bribe, typical African bribe. And we got back to the aircraft, and as we were boarding, all the local population was there, and they said, "But we need money as well. We also need money." So Richard turned around and said to them, "I left your money with the guys in the office. I left $200 there that you guys can share." Well, we got going, we got airborne, And to this day, I still wonder what they said when the guy said there was only $100. Who actually coughed up the other $100? Yeah, and that was about my career on C130s, because my next flight, I flew with Tony Evans to Roykop, and now we couldn't overfly Southwest Africa, Namibia anymore, because the elections had been run and it was now an independent country. So we had to fly around Southwest Africa. Just a quick two other stories about the C130s, if I can remember the second one now. The one was on Hercs. I flew the boxes out of Southwest Africa after the elections, and about half those boxes were never opened. The votes were never counted. So how free and fair were those elections? Then after the elections, Errol Earp and myself got tasked to flew Mapacha, Rundu, Ondangwa, Grootfontein, night stop, and then fly the reverse back. And we actually picked up the medical personnel out of the operational area. When we landed at Rundu, they were still busy lengthening the runway, because I walked up to the guy that was on this one tractor. I said, "What are you guys doing?" And he said, "Well, the money's been allocated and we're just doing the work." And that's why Rundu's got this wonderful runway that Mirages can land on and whatever. And in any case, I always say we put off the lights in the operational area, because when we left Ondangwa, Rundu, and Mapacha, there were no more military personnel in the operational area. Talking about the Rundu thing and the Mirages, I was at Rundu when after PSC was hit, and they were discussing it if we're going to fly him back or whatever. And I think at the end of the day, they got an aircraft from 21 Squadron that was faster, and they got him back to South Africa before we would have been able to. So that flight, and then I was flying with Tony Evans, and I just said to myself, you know what? The war's done. I don't belong in the Air Force anymore. It was just not the same Air Force anymore. I was actually even made the OC plants on 28 Squadron. Gil Wynn said, I must be the officer in charge of the NCO who's in charge of the workers that will water the plants. I mean, talk about selfish. And I did this flight. There was a female pilot with us on board on the way back from Roykop. Ilona somebody, one of the first woman pilots that actually flew commercially in the South African skies. In any case, and she was talking to Tony at that stage, and I sat there on the right-hand seat in this Herc, and I said to myself, I don't belong here anymore. You know, it's time to go. At that stage, I had already started studying and writing ground subjects for senior com. I actually went to the CAA, and I can't remember who I spoke to. And I asked them if it was possible to give the SAAF guys a chance to write senior com directly and see if we can get ATPL, air transport pilots licenses, instead of starting with a com. And this guy said to me, you've got one chance. I'll give you the chance to write the senior com exams directly. If you don't pass, or if you don't carry, because you write, I think it's 7 exams at that stage, and you have to pass 3 exams with your first sitting. If you don't carry, you will not be afforded the chance to continue. So I got back to the squadron, sorry, and I told everybody at the squadron, that's what's happened with me. And they all went to CAA, and they granted everybody a chance to write the exam once. I there were three of us. We went to night classes at Rand Airport. I'm trying to think who their names were. Damn it. But the three of us, we took turns. And we drove through from Pretoria to Rand for night classes, and then we went back to the squadron. And while I was still flying C130s, I passed three subjects the first time, three subjects the second time, because we weren't allowed to write air law the second time. We had to write air law because you write it for COM and not for ATP. So on the third sitting, I passed air law, and then I got my my civilian license courtesy of CAA. And the funny thing about that was I actually did my test at Wonderboom with a CAA inspector, and the wind was blowing from the west. So the westerly runway was in use, but the only instrument let down at Wonderboom is if the runway on the right, on the eastern side is in use. And I had to do an instrument part of the flight test. And this guy was adamant that I should ask for the NDB approach. And the tower said to me, "You can't do the approach because it's against our circuit that's being flown." He came on the radio and said, "Well, what can we do?" And they gave us a half approach, and I had to break off quite high and whatever. And I did my test. And at the end, he said to me, "Well, I don't know if you should pass this test because you couldn't do the IF part of it." And again, you know, aviation is a very interesting world. Then he looked at me and I looked at him. I said, "Well, I don't know. You tell me." And he said, "I think I'll pass you today. The rest wasn't so bad." Wasn't so bad, yeah. So he passed me. And I went, and because I had to get my license stamped and whatever, I went and bought him one of the most expensive bottles of whiskey, and I took it to his office just to say thanks. And his boss saw me approach with a whiskey, and he said, "You can't give him that whiskey because that will be seen as a bribe." So I said, "Well, then I can't give it to you, but I wanted to give this to you." So I had a damn good bottle of whiskey on courtesy of the CAA. I got my license, and then I had to wait to get out of the SAAF now. So nothing was happening at SAA because they started taking guys in '87 again, and they took quite a lot of guys, and they didn't really need people anymore. Sorry. But this license only lasts for 6 months. And being in the SAAF, I didn't have the money to renew my license. So I went to Colonel Giel Wynn. I said, "Colonel, I've got leave that the Air Force owes me. I've never taken leave except a month after I got my wings. I've got about 9 months leave owed to me. Would you mind if I go and leave as of from tomorrow, and I'll come back when you call me?" I went to Wonderboom, and I went to Passload, or the old Wonder Air, and Brigadier ex-SAAF guy was the boss of Wonder Air. And I said to him, "Sir, I would like to come and fly for you if you will only help me with renewing my license. You don't have to pay me or anything." He said to me, "No, Walter, we're not that bad. You can come and fly for us." I said, "But I'm still employed by the SAAF." He says, "Don't worry, we need you. Come and fly for us." So I started flying TP decks for Passload. All old SAAF boys, some of the nicest guys I've ever flown with as well, were there. And we flew night operations into Angola still because we were still supporting UNITA at that stage. Mel Pinar was one of the guys, and he actually crashed a TP deck out of one of the bases. I think the main base of UNITA. They took off, and the wing clipped a tree or something, and they both got killed. In any case, so I flew for this bunch, and I didn't want to have anything to know about the SAAF until my leave was finished. And the next thing, I got a phone call from Adrian Woodley at the SAAF, And he said to me, I must be at HQ the next morning. This brigadier wants to see me. And I said, well, I'm on leave. I'm not coming. He said, Walter, get yourself to this brigadier's office. It will be in your interest. Being myself and being a rebel all the time, I got dressed in civilian clothing, not in my SAAF uniform, and I rocked up in his office. I was the only guy there in a jacket and tie. And walked in, and the guys, Adrian Woodley actually did most of the talking. The SAAF were starting a place called Passload, which was a civilian registered airline flying a single C130 out of South Africa to Angola. And what we were flying, I said, when they said to me, you'll get your SAAF salary and we will pay you 1,000 rand for every flight that you did for us, that you do for us. And it meant 7-day trips where you did 2 flights a night. So in the late 80s, 14,000 rand tax-free for a week's work was quite a lot of money. And I said to him, well, I'll come and fly if that's the way you're going to pay us. But what about the other ones, the guys at Vonderboom that I'm flying with? They said, don't worry, we've already spoken to the brigadier. This brigadier has spoken to that brigadier, and as of from today, you're not working there anymore. So I went and got a civilian SAAF Hercules conversion at SAAF Air, and we flew the old Boland aircraft out to Kimberley. Every night, 2 fuel bowsers arrived, one that filled up the aircraft's wing tanks, and the other one filled up the fuselage with diesel. So we were flying diesel from Kimberley to, I think it wasn't Jamba, Luena, I think Luena, in southern Angola. We flew there twice a night. And the one night we flew there, and it rained and we couldn't see the place. So we had to do a go around, and the rain wasn't stopping and we were running out of fuel. And if you didn't get rid of the load, you wouldn't climb high enough to get the range to get back to Kimberley. Luckily, these 2 tanks that was filled with diesel had pipes on them, and the pipes were put into the bowsers on the other side. It had a booster pump, a normal pump that you've got on a fuel tank in an aircraft, and you just flick the switch, and this thing pumped all the fuel onto the trucks. Well, we opened the escape hatch on the side of the Herc, shoved the pipe out there, strapped it down, and then we hit the switch, and we got rid of a couple of tons worth of diesel overhead northern Botswana. We closed up the hatch, and we climbed, and we landed back at Joburg with almost 0 fuel on board. About a month later, I was there with Rich Beaver, and as we tried to put the gear down, the left-hand side gear didn't want to come down on the Herc. And we were sitting at Luena, at low level, all up. In any case, we got rid of the fuel, the diesel again, the same way. And we went in the hold over at Waterkloof, trying to get the gear down. And we were quickly running out of, very fast, running out of fuel in this aircraft. I can't remember the name of the engineer that was on board. But eventually I said to Rich Beaver, I can't sit here anymore. Let me go back and see what the hell this guy is doing. Got to the back. This guy hadn't even opened the panels to get to the undercarriage. I quickly helped him to open up the one little thing. On the Hercules undercarriage is a drive worm. And it's fitted with a fitting at the top with 4 screws through it. I'll never forget it. And when you split these 2 little fittings, you can take them off, and then you can put a ratchet on top of it, and then you can hand crank the undercarriage down. Well, As we put the ratchet on it, the two metal tanks that was full of diesel before restricted the ratchet so much that it could only move by one tooth at a time. And I tried pulling on this damn thing and it didn't want to give. And I said to the engineer, come and help me. And we pulled the damn thing and something gave. And I said, well, unfortunately, I dropped all the nuts and bolts. So how the hell do we fit this thing back together again? So we quickly opened the front one. I think it was about 30 screws that we had to undo. And then I took out the two screws on that jack like a surgeon. And I went and put it on the back one and tightened them up. And I ran into the cockpit. I said to Rich, put down the gear. And as he went down, the gear came down because that one tooth was all it needed to break that lock on the undercarriage. We put the gear down. We went straight in on runway at that stage 21 left, and we landed. We turned off the runway, and the engineer started the JP, whatever you call it, let's call it the APU, auxiliary power unit, and we taxied off the runway, taxied onto the taxiway, and the APU cut. Because as you would be able to remember, APU standpipe for the fuel is a little bit higher than the engines because you always keep your fuel for the engines, right? Well, that little bit was all it took to take the standpipe down to 0 and the APU cut. We made it back to SAAF and they fixed the aircraft and we continued with the flights the next night. So I'm responsible for 2 lines of dead trees in the Okavango Delta. I hope I didn't kill too many animals, or we didn't kill too many animals during those excursions. While flying for these boys, SAA called and they said they're taking 14 guys. And I was one of the lucky ones. And Russell S.P. Jones was also on the same selection, and he also got selected. So Russell came to me and said, Walter, we're on a damn good ticket here, money-wise. What are we going to do? Shouldn't we stay here? And I said to him, Russell, how long is this operation going to last? You know, the money is good, but it's not going to last forever. So we decided to take the SAA option. We went back to the guys and said, gentlemen, we're sorry. We can't help you anymore. We're going. And you knew about it from the beginning. Adrian Woodley and the boys were extremely unhappy with us because now they had to train 2 more people. At the end, everything worked out well, and we left for SAA, but they were still short of pilots. So they said to us, would we mind to fly one last week at night and then call it quits? And I said, sure. And they organized with SAA that we would do the flight for the last week and then join the classes 1 week later. And I said to Russell, you know what? I'm going to go to class on Monday morning because I don't want to miss anything. So we got to class, we did everything. And then on the way back home, Russell phoned the boys at Wesson and said, where do you want us to report for the flights tonight? And they, in no uncertain terms, told us that we can take a flyer. They will do the flying themselves. We're not going to steal their money. So for my first month's salary in SAA, which was only half the month's salary, I still got my SAAF salary as well, which for once worked out in my favor. And that's how I arrived at SAA. Being at SAA, you start off as a 3rd pilot. And you sit behind the other guys. Your actual job is to wet 2 little cloths that you put next to the pilot's seat, one hot and one cold, and you fold a bath bag into a rubbish bin. That's about what you do as a boy pilot. And obviously, you also sit there during the night as the in-flight relief, because as you know, on a 747, there's a little room just behind the cockpit where 2 guys can sleep in. So if you do these ultra long flights, there's always 2 guys trying to sleep just behind the cockpit. And for the first year and a half, that's what we did. Some people call it the Mach decimal 86 pub crawl, because, or 82 pub crawl, depending on what airline you fly for, because the 747 normally cruises at 82 or 86% the speed of sound. And you do very, very little as a boy pilot while you're actually just there to pick up the ropes of how the company works. And I was lucky enough, while I was a boy pilot, we still flew to Taiwan. And it makes me lucky in the sense that I flew the exact same route as what the Helderberg flew a couple of times. And even today, there's lots of people asking questions about the Helderberg. And I think I'm the only lucky person that went to Mauritius during the search for the Helderberg, that saw things on the island. Excuse me. And I flew the exact same routes as what the Helderberg flew in a sister ship and in other 747s for SAA. And there's a lot of discussions still going on today about who said what and whatever. But if you haven't been in those cockpits and you haven't been on the routes, I'm sorry to say, but a lot of the people are talking total hogwash. And yeah, that's the Helderberg story. Going to Taipei was definitely an eye-opener. You know, China, the fact that Chiang Kai-shek and the boys moved there after the Chinese took over China, it was still a democracy. And maybe it's not flying so much, but whenever you go on these flights, the old salts will show you all the interesting things. And that's the nice thing about flying for an airline, as when you get to the other side, you sit and wait, and you actually have to rest to do the flight back home. And at that stage, SA was quite short of aircraft, and the world was opening up for us. So a lot of new destinations were opening up, so that when you fly to Taipei, you would wait there for a week before the next aircraft would arrive. You fly to Lisbon, and you'd wait for a week before the next aircraft arrives. So we were actually on paid holidays. It was one of the best times of my life. Talking about Taipei, there's a place called the Night Market, where the local population sit, and they kill snakes, and they catch all the blood of the snakes, and they take out the poison little glands, and the men would drink this poison and blood to give them more oomph with the ladies later that night. And then you walk to a different part of this market, and there's young girls in cages waiting for these men to have their fill of snake blood. One thing I've learned in my life is there are many, many different traditions in the world that we simply don't have a clue of if you haven't been to those areas. Okay. So flying for SAA, it was most interesting. To get back to the training of SAA, we did the technical, which was in the good old days of slides. And the flight engineer that was giving us technical had to change these slides. I don't know through how many of these circular slides we went, but it went on for weeks. They, again, just like the SAAF, I think the South African aviation world is probably one of the best when it comes to technical training for pilots. It went on forever. We wrote exam after exam on understanding a 747. And finally we finished, and we went on to the simulator phase. It was 28 sim sessions. It was everything that you could do in a 747. They taught us as boy pilots. And the last day obviously was your test to keep your license up to date and everything. And one of the guys that was eventually the chief pilot for South African Airways. He did our flight test, and one of the biggest gentlemen I've ever met in my life. We did the test and passed, and then we went back home. At that stage was it was the period where SAA started flying over certain areas of Africa and whatever, and they actually didn't need us. And they said to the boss of SAA, "What are you going to do with these guys? You don't need them." He said, "I've employed them. I will not let go of them. We will need them later." And luckily for us, we stayed on, and it wasn't very long thereafter that they actually did need us, and they did need more pilots as SAA got larger and larger. To get back to the boy pilot part of it, I was sitting at home, minding my own business, and for a month, I didn't fly at all. And my father-in-law at the time walked up to me and said, "Are you still employed? I mean, what are you doing at home? A month is finished." I said, "Well, I don't know. They paid me my salary at the end of the month, so I suppose I'm still employed." I phoned the company and said, "When am I going to fly?" They say, "We will get you a flight as soon as we can." It became the Sunday night. I was sitting at home. The next thing, the phone rang, and it was Johan from the rosters. He said to me, "Walter, when can you be at the airport?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "There's a flight to London, and it's leaving within an hour, and we want you to be on that flight." Well, I tell you what, I went for a quick shower. The wife was packing my bag, and off I went. I got to SAA. They said to me, "There's a combi that normally took us to the area where the passengers went through at that stage, and they dropped me off in front of this building." Now, I have never been north of the Harpies River, except in SAAF aircraft where they were normally trying to shoot us down. I didn't even know what Jan Smuts in those days looked like on the inside. I just walked up to the first booth and I said, "Please help me. Where do I go to?" Where does the SA crew hand in their luggage? I got to the desk. They grabbed my bag and they said to me, "You better run. We'll get your bag on board." As far as I went, I just asked, "Where do I go to now? Where do I go to now?" I got through customs. I got to the gate, and the people were waiting for me. I got on board of the aircraft, and as I got on board of the aircraft, they shut the door behind me. They were only waiting for me, and that's how I got out of South Africa on SA for the first time. I got to the cockpit, and there was another boy pilot, just like me, who also started with me, and it was also his first flight. I don't know why it was the two of us, but obviously the guy that was supposed to be on the flight that had to teach the other guy got sick or something happened. And here we were, a four-man crew with a captain and co-pilot that knows what life is all about. And there's two juniors that's never flown north of South Africa. And off we went. We managed to make it to London. We got out on the apron, got into the bus, and that was my first introduction to Heathrow. Got our bags and got deposited in the traffic of London, all the way from Heathrow to the center of the city, where we were staying in the Portman Hotel. Sorry. Now, the Portman is probably not one of the best hotels, but it's also definitely not one of the shabbiest hotels. And it's right on Hyde Park and Oxford Street. So you're right in the center of London. SAA really bent over backwards to make the stay of their crew as pleasurable as possible. Another thing, in my SAAF career, as you would know, whenever you went on a flight, you had to use your money to buy yourself food. And when you got back, you had to fill in forms or whatever and wait for about a month or so before your money was ever returned to you. And SAA, it worked differently. When you walked into the hotel, they said you were going to stay here for 3 days. Here's 3 days meal allowance. And they gave you money for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that was ample money. And if you really wanted to, you could eat enough. You could have a couple of drinks if you were there for more than one night. And you still had money left to buy presents for the kids at home. which is what I did most of the times. We stayed in the Portman, as I said. As a matter of fact, that was during the Republic Day festivities. And we went to near Wimbledon on the Saturday because there was a big South African get-together. And we had a most enjoyable weekend in London, these two little boy pilots. We flew back, I can't remember what day, got back home, and my eyes had really opened as to international air travel and the way that airlines do it compared to the way that Air Force guys do it. It's two different ball games. My next flight was to Frankfurt, where I was supposed to get my training, and that was about half a month later again. So we didn't really overwork ourselves at that stage. But sorry, excuse me. Slowly but surely, the flying picked up, and I enjoyed flying to Taiwan, as I've said. And I said to my wife, because in SAA, the wives and the families could fly with you once a year, and the wife would be seated in first class to show her a bit of what SAA could actually dish up. And I took the wife with me to Mauritius. I think we had our 3rd or 4th wedding anniversary on the island. And the next day we left for Taiwan. And yeah, my wife came back pregnant from Taiwan. And I always said behind my daughter's left ear is made in Taiwan. In any case. So yeah, as I say, again, I flew the route quite a couple of times, linking in with a Helderberg and what went down there. I enjoyed Taiwan, and it was dirt cheap. I bought things in Taiwan that you couldn't believe how much they actually asked for it. Then talking about flying and buying things, getting back to Johannesburg became the next interesting hurdle to cross. You walked into customs, and let me tell you, why they did it, I don't have a clue, but it was always a fight in between customs and the aircrew. The aircrew was trying to hide whatever they bought abroad, or they tried to lie about the price that they paid for it, to try and pay as little tax on the import duty. Why didn't the customs people say, go and find whatever can help the country in the struggle and bring it back for us? Wouldn't that have served more of a purpose? But in any case, that's beyond the point. So being in the airline, at that stage, we flew to Rio, London, Frankfurt, Switzerland, let me think, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Mauritius. There weren't that many destinations. As we were getting more and more accepted in the rest of the world, we went to Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. We started flying to Argentina. We started flying back to Paris. We obviously always used Sal Island as a fuel stop on the way to Europe, when we flew around the Bulge still, when I started off in the airline, as there were still the sanctions against South Africa. But Sal Island, as I said, and then the States opened up again, the USA, and we started flying to New York again. And I think we eventually flew to Atlanta as well, but we flew to the capital of the USA for a certain time, which was then flown by the 747-400, which were just getting into service as I joined SAA. And we flew the shorter routes. I think one of the last destinations that opened up was Australia. During this time, as I said, we didn't fly a lot. And then every 6 months, you had to go back into the simulator to keep your license current. And it was quite a test. And not flying, firstly, sitting in the seat and not doing landings and takeoffs. I can't say that we were the sharpest knives in the drawer at that stage. But luckily, the instructors were quite lenient because they realized we didn't get enough flying. I spent a year and a half on the Mach .82 pub crawl, and then I went and flew A300, the Airbus A300 on the internal. Back to the French way of thinking again. The hydraulic systems are titled in colors, where in all American aircraft, it's titled in numbers. Hydraulic system 1, 2, 3, and 4 on a 4-engine aircraft, or red and blue and yellow and green and brown on an Airbus or a European aircraft. The conversion again was took forever. I was in the simulator with an instructor that was upgraded to be an instructor, and these two guys were trying to outwit each other with technical knowledge. Well, I tell you what, I felt like a total idiot sitting there being briefed for a simulator session. These two guys were on a level that I never expected. And as a matter of fact, I've never seen again. But they were damn good, and they taught me how to fly an A300. The A300 is quite a big beast. It's got very long legs, and she's most unforgiving when landing her. If you can fly as A300 and you can land her quite well, it takes some doing. It's also quite a big aircraft, and it's quite a big twin. So you've got to have your finger out when things go wrong. And they do go wrong in the simulator, let me tell you. We normally flew, the route structure of the A300 was Johannesburg, Durban, and Johannesburg, Cape Town during the week. And on a Sunday, the aircraft flew to Mauritius and back. That was our whole route structure. We got to know the route in between Cape Town and Joburg and Durban to such an extent that you didn't even really need a map anymore, or frequencies or whatever. You just knew it off by heart. And it was quite soul-destroying. At this stage, SAA decided that there were too many pilots on A300s and too few on Boeing 737s. And Louis Duplessis and myself were the two juniors on the A300 fleet. And they said to us, as of from Monday, you're on a Boeing 737 conversion. So we went and did the 737 conversion, 2 co-pilots and 2 captains. I'm trying to think about the 2 captains' names, but also the 2 juniors. In any case, another month and a half of technical, another month and a half of simulator flying, and we were just released on the line when they said to us, would you like to go back to Airbuses? Because they opened a new route structure on the A300, and they needed more pilots on the A300. And about a month and a half later, I was doing my route training on the A300. I was actually doing my first leg into Cape Town. And being a difficult aircraft to land, I put down a firm landing in Cape Town. And the flight engineer looked at me and he said, that was a crap landing. And I said, well, you must realize I haven't flown this aircraft for over 3 months. Well, almost 6 months. And he said, well, then it wasn't such a bad landing. And we continued. And then, luckily, the landings improved. The reason why we went and flew Airbuses again and why we were short of crew was the one Airbus was actually bought as a freighter, but she was converted to a passenger liner by SAA. And now South African Airlines decided that they would become part of the cargo world and just fly cargo in certain aircraft. I mean, all aircraft fly cargo below the floor of the passengers, but they don't fly as much as pure cargo aircraft. In any case, so this one Sierra Delta Foxtrot was converted to a full freighter, and we now had to fly flowers, excuse me, from Harare to Amsterdam. But being an Airbus, she, what we call, doesn't have long legs. So we had to hop from Johannesburg, where the servicing was done, to Harare, pick up the flowers, a whole aircraft full of flowers, and then we flew to Uganda, Entebbe, then to Cairo, and from Cairo to Amsterdam. Obviously, the crew couldn't do the whole legs, all the way to Amsterdam because it just took too long. So what we did was we flew as passengers to Harare. Then the aircraft would land that night. We would take it from Harare to Entebbe to Cairo, get off. The aircraft would go with a different crew to Amsterdam. The crew would get off a different crew back to Cairo. And initially, then the crew that flew into Cairo flew it back down to Johannesburg. But then they said no, to get the guys back from Cairo was a bit of a difficulty. So what they started doing was we were rotating with the aircraft. So we had a flight that went up to Cairo. You got off, the aircraft went back to Johannesburg, back up to Cairo. Then you would take it back to or down to Amsterdam. The aircraft would come back up, and then you'd fly it back to Cairo again, and then only would you go home. So the flights were quite long, and you went away from home sometimes as long as 14 days before you saw your families again. So it was quite lonely times. But as I said before, we weren't given food to eat as in the SAAF. We were being paid in meal allowance. And in those days, we got $110 per day. So if you were away for 14 days and you ate just normally and you didn't go crazy, you could bring back $1,000, which meant a lot of money, especially for myself, which had kids that was growing up and in creches and in schools and whatever, and the wife that's not working. Every penny helps at the end of the day. I got back onto the 747 Classic fleet, and I did my 747 simulator check the day after the South Africans won the World Cup for the first time. I think, what was it, 1995, if I'm not mistaken. Well, it was one of the worst days of my life when we won it the first time, because I couldn't take part in the festivities as I was in the simulator the next day. Luckily, it went well in the simulator, and off we went. And then I became a 747 co-pilot. At this stage, the whole structure had changed. We were flying to Australia, whereas before we flew Perth, Sydney, where I was in Sydney when my daughter was born, and I couldn't get home. When I got home, she and the missus was already back at home, and the missus wasn't very happy with me that I wasn't there for the birth. But that's a long story. In any case, so we didn't fly to Sydney anymore, but we did the Perth legs, and Qantas did a code sharing and flew the Sydney legs for South African Airways. We took Qantas passengers from Perth, and they took SAA passengers from Sydney. We lost the Taiwanese stop because the ANC government wasn't in bed, as you know, with the Taiwanese. We kept the Hong Kong. Then we started flying to India and Thailand and Japan and all these places. And I must say, my time on 747s as a co-pilot was most enjoyable destination-wise. I saw places in the world that very few other people have seen. And with the relative small fleets, we didn't have the frequency through all these destinations. So we get to spend some time in the cities that we were visiting. And to just pick up on the different cultures, the way that people live, the sternness of the people in Switzerland, for instance, the sternness of the German people. You know, you walk around in the cities and whatever, and hardly anybody smiles. Well, you definitely, if you crack a smile at a Swiss person, he looks at you funny. They're just very morbid people. The French are more jovial. They will get into a party or whatever. Going to South America,
well, that's a different ball game. I mean, they're very warm people. The Americans are more reserved, but a lot warmer than the Swiss as well. I spent 5 years flying 747 classics, and the 747 is a most interesting aircraft in the fact that it's the last big passenger liner that had 3 seats, 2 pilots and a flight engineer. When you get into a simulator and you do a sim check, the cockpit gets divided into 2 sections, where the captain and the flight engineer handles the emergencies, and the co-pilot becomes the flying pilot. And you've got to keep the aircraft safe, and you've got to get into the holding patterns, set the aircraft up for landing, and whatever you can do, while the 2 other pilots handle every emergency that's thrown at them. At one of these simulator checks of ours, we were in the simulator and we had lost 2 engines on the one side. We lost 2 hydraulic systems. The aircraft was barely flyable. And Jimmy Deal was the guy with me in the simulator, the captain. I can't remember who the flight engineer was. But here we are in the open, and I'm holding to the south of Johannesburg. You can actually see the runway in front of me. And Jimmy Deal and the flight engineer are going through one checklist after the other to configure this aircraft for landing. And at one stage, we were flying towards the airfield, and Jimmy Deal said to me, "What is that in front of us?" I said, "It's Johannesburg International Airport. It's clear skies." And Jimmy Deal looked at me and said, "I've got control, gear down." And I put the gear down, and he said, "Add 70 knots to your VREF." Now, VREF is your speed that you cross the runway threshold on a big jet. And sometimes a VREF can be, if you're quite heavy, it can be in the vicinity of about 150 knots. Now, adding 70 knots onto that takes it up quite a bit. But we weren't at 150 knots that day. We were roughly at about 130 knots. So the speed was set at 200 knots. And Jimmy Deal said, "Request landing clearance." And we landed on this 747 on runway 03 left at Johannesburg in the simulator. Jimmy Deal stopped the aircraft. We taxied off the end of the runway, and he stopped the aircraft. The instructor went through the roof. He said, "That's not what's supposed to be happening in this session. You're supposed to go through all the checklists." Jimmy Deal turned around and looked at him. He said to him, "Are we safely on the ground?" He said, "Yes." He said, "That's why I'm a captain on this aircraft. I can make decisions." And Jimmy Deal passed away of a heart attack years later. And he's probably one of the guys that I most admired flying with as a co-pilot. So, yeah, there's so many stories that I can tell you about 747 flying, but most of them are about pub crawls and having fun. And that's about it. Can we call it quits for the day? There's now a fire alarm down here.
Walter, I do think we definitely, well, you've called the shots yourself. We're coming in for number 2 one of these days.
Yeah.
I do thank you tremendously. I really, really enjoyed this. And yes, we're going to do number 2 in the not too distant future. Just let the dust settle a little bit on this one. And then we do number 2. Buy a donkey. I really, really appreciate it.
Meneer, baie dankie. Meneer, baie dankie vir jou wat jy so rustig daar sit. Jy weet mens, ek sit hier so en ek praat en ek sê vir myself, maar jy blaas mos nou actually wrong, jy weet. Ek het dit nog nooit gedoen nie en ek wil dit ook nie doen nie. Maar
the point of the matter is, Legacy Conversations is about capturing the individual's history and story, the legacy that you have left behind or leaving behind, not left behind. Well, you've left the SAAF, you've left Spories, you've SAAF, for those that you don't know, that was our nickname for them. any case, long story short, we're going to call it quits for today or this evening, whenever you're watching. And we'll be back soon with episode number 2. And we have a few ideas in the making still for the future, including updating you on the progress of the book and things like that. But for now, I'm going to say thank you, Walter. Thank you, viewers, for enjoying this with me, with us. And until we chat again, God bless.
Thanks, Vossie. Go well. Ja, op hy sê wel, ek het nog gesels van low-level vlieg, maar dis nou foto's. 28 eskader het mos sy eie pap gemaak in sy hangar.
Okay.
Dan kon jy 'n baksteen koop met jou naam daarop. Die aand by die party aankom, dis my naam klaar op die muur. Toe het iemand vir my klaar my muur gekoop en my naam staan op die muur, dat dit op die foto staan Walter Low-level Vice. Klop vir die ou man het hulle self bekak om saam mee te vlieg. Maar nou ja.
Ja.
Dus wel, kyk, ons daarby uitkom.
Jy noem DJ de Kok daarso.
Ja.
Is jy bewus dat hy oorlede is?
Ja, nee, ek het gehoor hy is oorlede.
Okay. Wel, ons het 2 video's op die kanaal wat die manne sy tot rus lê gereël het.
Wil jy nie vir my die link stuur nie asseblief?
Ek sal so maak.